Could you just check to make sure your microphones are working back there?
Seems like
Yes,
we're good.
good. I pushed the right buttons. So good morning, everyone. I'm calling the hearing to order. This is a place where the trains run on time. We start on time and we get finished on time. The hearing will run till 12:15 today, a little bit longer than we had originally said because we've added an extra witness. So again, good morning and welcome to the Assembly Committee on Public Safety's informational hearing on human trafficking. This is an issue that is of great concern to the community as well as public safety officials. Every year the committee gets a number of bills which are titled as human trafficking bills. These bills fall into a wide range of categories. Some bills deal with the issue of prostitution, some deal with victim services, while others focus on labor trafficking. Given the wide range of topics associated with issues surrounding human trafficking, I felt it important to have an educational forum where we could explore the issues in greater depth. The purpose of this hearing is to learn about the experience both of legal experts, community members in dealing with a broad range of issues surrounding human trafficking. The committee held a handful of bills over for consideration until we had an opportunity to study the issue further. Through the testimony we hear today, I hope we can leave this room with a greater understanding of what the scope of the problem is in California and what we can do as policymakers to address it. Today's hearing will begin with a presentation from the California Department of Justice on their 2012 report on the state of human trafficking in California. We will hear from Robert Sumner and Maggie Krell with the Department of Justice. The second panel will focus on legal issues related to human trafficking. Panelists include Alameda County DA Nancy O'Malley, Maxine Dugan from the Erotic Service Providers, former Supervising Deputy Attorney General Jared Mosley, and Stephen Munkelt from the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice. The final panel will be an open discussion about human trafficking services. Panelists include Nilda Valmores from My Sister's House in Sacramento, Stephanie Richard from the Coalition Against Slavery and Trafficking in Los Angeles, Alexandra Ludnick from RTI International in UC Berkeley, Ruth Silver Taub from the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking, and Deborah Pembroke from the Coalition to End Human Trafficking in Monterey and Santa Cruz counties. We have a very full agenda, so I will ask the witnesses to try and keep within the scheduled time limits to ensure there's sufficient opportunity for public comment in the end, and I'm going to thank in advance the witnesses and members for taking the time to participate in this important hearing. I now invite the other members who are here today, Assemblywoman Patty Lopez, Assemblyman Reggie Jones-Sawyer, to make opening remarks, and if they would like to do so. So, Patty or Reggie, whichever wants to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first start by commending you for putting this together. During the year, we saw a plethora of different legislative actions to address this issue. Because of your leadership, you saw early on that it was kind of nibbling at the sides and it didn't really address the full problem. The purpose of these hearings, as the Chairman Quirk has mentioned, is to have a comprehensive plan on how we deal with this, not only just legislatively, but also through the budget process. How do we get the resources down to the communities so that we can eliminate and ultimately abolish this heinous action that's going on in our state? I am extremely excited because I think this will be the first, at least from the state of California, this will be the first effort to look at a long range and a comprehensive way that we can deal with this. Human trafficking hit us like nothing else before. I think the last time we've had this kind of emergency was when we had the crack cocaine epidemic. It just was like a tsunami that just overtook us. Law enforcement has said that they need more resources, and sometimes they don't even know what they need. And so I'm welcoming not only ideas that we can get that we're doing in the state, but out of state, because this is not only a local issue, a state issue. It's become a national, and I can say an international problem that the resources that we're using now may not be enough, and we need to apply more resources. So again, I want to thank the chairman for bringing this all together, because I know he made a commitment that we would do this, and I know it was under very harsh and trying times, because there were laws that were brought before this committee. Mr. Sumner, Ms. Krell, where you're sitting now, where we had legislators that pleaded with us to move ahead with legislation that we knew would not fully address the problem, and he had the courage to say, let's look at this comprehensively, and that's difficult. And so I'm glad we're here and that we're now going to address it.
Assemblymember Lopez.
Yes, good morning, Chair and members and staff. I'm really happy to be here today. And human trafficking is one of the issues really strong in my district, so I really look forward to learn more how I can be helpful in my district and present some legislation in the next session. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, so we're particularly concerned about addressing first of all, the definition of what is trafficking, and then the scope of the problem. And also discussing, particularly, although sex trafficking gets the headlines, labor trafficking is also a big issue. I don't know how they compare, and frankly, when you're talking about something that's illegal, it's probably not possible to give precise numbers. But the other thing that I particularly would like to hear about is numbers for the state of California, insofar as we can get them. The only numbers I have so far that I can really relate to is that the number of people in prison for human trafficking offenses, that is sections PC 236 primarily, and there's about 150 of them. There's also about 180 people in jail for pimping and pampering, which could be also human trafficking. So it's about 330 people in jail for that. Is this the tip of the iceberg, or is this indicative of sort of the level of the problem? It's obviously a big problem, whether the number is 330 or 3,000. But if we can get some idea of the extent to which we are able to judge the size of the problem, looking at labor versus sex trafficking, and how much do we think is out there that where we haven't put these folks behind bars yet. We have 150. Are there many, many more out there? So if you can address those issues in particular, please go ahead with whatever prepared statement you have, and then I'd be very interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you. So, Robert.
Yes, good morning. Robert Sumner with Attorney General Kamala Harris's office, and I'm happy to speak to those points. I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to be on this panel. I think that the rest of the agenda is just made up of really great experts from the human trafficking fight. So I appreciate the opportunity. And I'll be brief in terms of the history, but just to go over kind of what led to the 2012 report, which I believe was what you wanted to hear about in particular. That actually came from an earlier report that was the result of Assembly Bill 22 by Assemblymember Sally Lieber back in 2005. And Attorney General Harris was actually a sponsor of that bill when she was the district attorney of the city and county of San Francisco. In addition to creating 236.1 in the Penal Code, which was the first specific to human trafficking crime in California, it also created something called the Combat Trafficking and Slavery Alliance within the Department of Justice. And that alliance was tasked for coming up with the first comprehensive report on the state of human trafficking. This was some 10 years ago. And when that first report, which I'm a visual person, so I brought a copy from 2007, was released, it was commendable in that it was the first time that we as a state had really started an inquiry into human trafficking, but really the primary results from the report were focused on how much we didn't know. Human trafficking was a new crime in the Penal Code. The definition, which can be distilled down essentially to human slavery in a modern-day era, was something that was still largely mysterious, especially because the landscape has been changing rapidly over the last 10 years. And that's why when Attorney General Harris first got elected to the Department of Justice, one of the very first things she did was she reconvened that task force. She figured that 5 years had gone by and it was time for us to bring back all of the different experts to the table and see, okay, in the past half decade, how much have we learned about this issue? And that's where we came to the 2012 report, which was the result of 3 meetings with a great task force, many of whose members are actually going to be featured at this hearing today. And that was considered an updated assessment of the scope and nature of human trafficking in California. We held a symposium to release it, and we've been really grateful to see that in the 5 years or so since that effort was begun, we've seen quite a lot accomplished by the legislature and by state agencies and local law enforcement. So just to go briefly over what we were able to release in this report, which again is the most recent statistical information that we have at the state level through the Department of Justice on human trafficking. What we really looked at is we looked at the time frame of 2010 to 2012. We had a number of regional task forces that the Department of Justice partnered with, and we were able to look at the numbers that they had in terms of their investigations, in addition to our interactions with local law enforcement to see what was being done at the county level, at the city level, and through more localized federal efforts. The first numbers that we were able to get from that is from 2010 to 2012, the regional task forces for human trafficking arrested 1,798 perpetrators suspected of human trafficking. In addition to that, there was an identification of some 1,277 victims. So as far as California...
Could you give me those numbers again?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and of course I'm happy to provide my remarks to staff, but it's 1,798 perpetrators and 1,000... Sorry?
No questions yet. There will be time for public comment.
And 1,000...
I don't want you... If you speak up again, I will have the sergeants take you out. By the way, I do want to introduce Senator Huff, who came in a little while ago, and thank him for being here. He had one of the bills that we held in committee. Go ahead. So 1,798
perpetrators and 1,277 victims.
1,270. But we only have about 90 folks in prison. Why is that number so different?
So to speak to that, first of all, the way that those numbers were reached is this was the result of a survey of 9 regional task forces that were operated specifically on human trafficking. And they had investigations that resulted in arrests that were operated, not necessarily at the state level when you consider that these were federal task forces. A lot of this would be a federal crime as opposed to the state crime of 236.1 within the penal code. So I don't think that there's a direct correlation between what our local, for example, district attorney's offices have been able to accomplish, considering it's kind of a parallel track with the federal government, which for a long time has had kind of original jurisdiction over the human trafficking issue because they, were able to operate based on laws that weren't passed in California yet prior to 2005.
All right. So these people were then prosecuted in federal court?
Well, many of them would be. The number of perpetrators is an arrest number, and it's from 2010 to 2012. And from that date, I can't speak to how many of those resulted in a conviction.
Yeah. Again, there's only 90 people in prison, so how do we get from 1798? Are they going to federal prison or?
Potentially. We have strong partnerships.
Or are these, the problem is we get the conflation between pimping and human trafficking. And there are 182 people in prison for pimping and pandering, plus another 61 for pimping and pandering youth, so about 240. But that's all very different from 1798. So I'm just trying to figure out, everybody knows I'm the numbers guy. I have a degree in physics. And I'm just trying to put all these things in perspective. And were all of these for felonies? Do you have any indication at all what the actual crime that was charged was?
Not at the federal level. I'm not an expert in the federal convictions that might have been brought.
That's fine. But, we can only answer what we know, and I don't want you to go beyond that.
Sure, and I would certainly suggest directing you to the TIP report, the Trafficking in Persons report that is put out frequently by the federal government. I believe that one of those reports back when we were doing our inquiry in 2012 put the number of suspected victims worldwide at 21 million. And so the federal government has, for a long time been assessing the numbers for the issue. In addition to when we began to survey who these folks were, and again, I apologize that I don't know what the ultimate disposition of those cases were, but we had a number of other statistical findings related to that. We found that 72% of the victims were actually of American origin within California, which kind of defied what was at the time considered to be much more of an immigration issue specifically. As far as the distribution of gender, we found that girls and women made up 98% of suspected sex trafficking, but they actually made up 55% of labor trafficking, which, considering that for a while there had been this presumption that there was a distribution where, men and boys were traditionally labor trafficked and women and girls were sex trafficked, it showed that that was actually a little bit of a fair split, at least as far as labor trafficking. The other thing that's really changed our understanding in the past few years is the fact that just the nature of how these crimes are being committed has changed drastically. The Attorney General always wants to highlight the fact that transnational criminal organizations have taken a specific interest in human trafficking, in part because they found it to be a very low risk and high reward crime. It's one of the reasons why it's been tied for the second most profitable crime, along with gun trafficking and behind drug trafficking. Back when we released this report, we very boldly pointed to a number of $32 billion a year as the estimated profits resulting from human trafficking. And $32 billion a year was kind of one of our top line talking points for one of the big startling revelations we had about human trafficking. But it's actually, since then, just to really point out what a point in time entity this report was for when we issued it, last year the ILO estimated $150 billion. In underground forced labor trafficking profits. And so really the inquiry has only been deepening, especially as our understanding of labor trafficking has grown, because historically labor trafficking has been both under-investigated and under-reported, and we're continuing to understand exactly what type of forced servitude constitutes human trafficking. And ultimately, our definition is becoming more inclusive as we understand the nature of many of these forced servitude situations. The other issue that we've been running into, which is kind of tied in with the transnational criminal organization element, is the fact that adoption of technology has been incorporated, where increasingly sophisticated means of soliciting human trafficking victims and connecting services have been taken advantage of. Just the advent of smartphones, we've spoken to agents and have said that that has dramatically increased the way that they are able to operate covertly behind law enforcement. Also uses of websites like Backpage and other internet websites in order to both solicit and offer services of human trafficking victims. The Attorney General likes to speak about just the sophistication of the TCOs, the criminal organizations that operate across the border, in particular by pointing out the fact that she's personally toured the tunnels and with smooth walls and ventilation throughout. It gives you an idea of just how much income and sophistication is being dealt with from the organizations that are perpetrating the crime. With those statistics about the scope of the problem, at least, within the 2012 parameters, just to go over, the fact that we did have a lot of progress within that first half decade since when the law was passed. The primary focus was that we've been trying to work on training as much as possible. It was such a new and previously unidentified crime that law enforcement and first responders often had no idea how to deal with it. There were a number of federal trainings that happened, and also non-government organizations like CAST offered training. The Attorney General's office has recently partnered with the U.S. Attorney's offices to offer training for identifying victims of human trafficking and understanding how it can be prosecuted. There's been an effort to increase adoption of Penal Code 236.1. In my personal experience, 236.1, while specific to human trafficking, has not always been seen by prosecutors as the conviction that's the most effective to secure for a perpetrator of human trafficking. There have been efforts like through the CASE Act to reform 236.1. And also there have been a number of district attorneys' offices that have really championed it. I'm glad that District Attorney O'Malley is here today, because when we did our assessment, we saw that almost half of convictions in the first 5 years that 236.1 was on the books came from Alameda County. So there's been an increase.
Well, I'm proud to say she's my DA.
And in the meantime, for a number of the recommendations, I actually really want to commend the legislature. There have been a number of initiatives coming out of the state of California that have dealt with many of the topics that were addressed in our report. Not to say in the very least the funding of NGOs in the budget last year, and I'd like to commend Assemblymember Jones Sawyer on that with the $10 million for a lot of the organizations that work with victims, provide services, and most importantly, many of them provide training, which allow awareness and the ability to deal with human trafficking to grow. There have been a number of other bills that I can speak to briefly. The Attorney General recently released a resource guide for SB 657, which was the Steinberg legislation having to do with supply chain transparency, which we think gets pretty directly at the notion of international labor trafficking and its entry into California. We've also seen victim expungement addressed in part through AB 1585 by Alejo to set aside convictions. There was a bill by Senator Mitchell on wiretapping, SB 955. And then also I want to commend the legislature last year for passing SB 674 by Senator De Leon and Speaker Atkins, which had to do with UNT visas, which I think that a lot of the folks on the agenda today will be able to speak to the importance of these visas, and by helping with the state side of that.
Perhaps for the audience, you could say what UNT visas are.
Great, and that will be reliable. So I'm happy to be available for Q&A, but I want to take the opportunity to introduce Maggie Krell, who is another district deputy attorney general within our office. The attorney general recently kind of formalized her leadership on the issue of human trafficking with the Department of Justice by making her the statewide coordinator of human trafficking work, and she can speak briefly to the work that we've been doing at the state level.
Thank you very much for being here. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Sorry, good morning. My name is Maggie Krell. I'm a deputy attorney general, and I've been prosecuting these type of cases for some time now, and our office has also put together an inter-office working group on the human trafficking issue, and really what it reflects is the diversity that this issue touches. So we don't really see it just as a problem for law enforcement and for prosecutors and for public safety. It's also a problem for public health. It's also an issue that education and teachers have to deal with. It's an issue that nurses and hospitals have to deal with. It's a labor issue. It's a poverty issue. So human trafficking is a challenge that touches a lot of different disciplines, and that's what we've reflected in our inter-office working group. We have participation from our Bureau of Children's Justice, our newly formed bureau, to deal with and to help to find solutions around the CSEC, commercially sexually exploited minor issue. We also have participation from our under economy attorneys who are looking at this as a continuum issue that starts with wage theft, and then on the other end of that is labor trafficking. And so we've really, tried to put that together in the hopes of addressing this challenge in the most multifaceted way possible. The kinds of cases we're looking at involve multiple jurisdictions. Reporting is still an issue. I think that the numbers that you get from NGOs on how many victims they've identified versus the numbers you get on law enforcement on how many cases that have been charged, those numbers deviate significantly. The question that you had on why there's only approximately 300 people in prison for 266 and 236.1. Part of that is the fact that some of them are doing federal time. Another issue is that these are very, very challenging cases to prosecute. A number of people get arrested for human trafficking. It doesn't mean they get convicted of human trafficking. Oftentimes, the cases are resolved in the sex trafficking context. The cases are resolved for pimping because that offense doesn't require us to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And when we have a victim who may have already fled the area or may not be cooperative or may be in fear for his or her life, it's very difficult to get that kind of testimony. So when we have an opportunity to get a plea to a lesser charge, still a felony, still a prison offense, that seems like a good option. So it doesn't.
Sure, but there's sort of 90 under 236 and roughly 140 under 143 under 266. So 90 as human trafficking, 243 under 266 pimping and pandering, of which 61 are for minors. It's just a large difference. In doing the reading for this, what I found is that nobody seems to have numbers that agree with anybody else, which maybe isn't surprising given it's illegal. We only have about 5 minutes left, so if you could take a couple of minutes to sum up, and then we can have questions from, and I want to introduce Miguel Santiago, who has one of the bills we're looking at this year, and he has just arrived. I'll give him a chance to introduce himself before the next panel. If you could just sort of sum up, and then we'll have questions from the other members.
Absolutely, and I'm mainly just here to answer questions, but I'll just end with saying that in addition to prosecution, the awareness and education work that we're doing is critical. I would compare this sort of to the Amber Alert system that at first was controversial, and it was the idea that you were empowering the community to help law enforcement find people. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of human trafficking victims. We don't even know their names to put them on a billboard, but we do know that they need help, and so the work that we do in education and awareness is key to getting first responders, nurses, people that work on trains, people that work in hotels, people that work in all these industries that could be touched by this crime to really speak up and help us out.
Great. All right. Members, who would like to ask some questions? Sure. Do you want to say something? Just give it a little introduction of yourself and your interest.
Yes, thank you, and sorry to take up your time. And I want to, sorry for being a couple minutes late, but I do want to thank the chair for holding this hearing. And it did stem from a conversation that Mr. Jones Sawyer and I had about a particular bill that I think you've been briefed on, so I won't go into why I think the merits of it are important. But I would ask you to, in your conversation, to help us identify those very specific things that are doable towards prosecution. Obviously, prevention would be the main thing. But listen, I took this issue up, quite frankly, and I never had an opportunity to share with very many people, quite frankly, because of an experience that I had in the district. And the district that I represent, the 53rd Assembly District, which encompasses some high-level activities in human trafficking, like Koreatown, Pico Union, MacArthur Park, downtown Los Angeles, and Huntington Park, I think, are some of the hubs that experience this. So I was running for office, and in doing so, I'd met with some folks at a local bar in Koreatown to talk about my race. And that's not why I'm saying this, but this is exactly what happened. And in this, there was these young ladies who were serving us alcohol. But what I didn't notice is they only serve you a very little small portion of drink at a time. And to me, I thought it was cultural, and pardon my ignorance on it, but I thought it was the norm to have that happen. I quickly noticed that they didn't understand the language. And quickly noticed that they were extremely young. And I don't remember their faces. I remember what they looked like, and I remember that they were sitting very close to us. And when you're in the heat of the moment of talking about my race, I really didn't focus too much on what was going on around me. But it was a bar with karaoke rooms on the side with the drapes that go on the side, and it was a 20-minute meeting, so I rush out of there and I go about my business. And on my way home, I kept thinking to myself about these young ladies that didn't have faces, didn't have names, never even had a chance to talk to them, except for I remember for asking for alcohol, you would tap, and they would serve you a drink, not a full drink. And on my way home, the torment in my mind kept increasing that there could be the potential, and I don't allege that it happened, but it could be the potential that I sat in a place that had victims of human trafficking, and that these young ladies without names, without faces, must have sat there thinking that I may have been the guy to purchase the service that night. And the torment, and I just can't even explain it, but the torment that any individual could potentially go through, knowing that they're enslaved now to do our bidding and our will in a $32 billion industry that is uncontrolled in a lot of ways, because, like you mentioned, you get prosecuted for something lesser than human trafficking, has just never left my mind. And these aren't the people who have the high-powered lobbyists. They're not the people who have the most articulate arguments. And quite frankly, in a lot of different ways, it's an invisible and silent victims that we as lawmakers really have not focused and not done enough of. and me too, I'll point at myself too, while we've been very good at looking at interest groups' needs and those constituencies that are well represented, we're not looking at representing or trying to do things for folks who don't have representation and don't have the best of arguments. And I have a 2-year-old, 2 years, 3 months. Sorry to take up a little bit more time.
Yeah,
2 years, 3 months. And when I look at him and I think the possibility that if I had a different sort of fortune in a different sort of country or a different sort of state, and something terrible like my son being taken, stolen, or leaving on his own and caught in this kind of business could potentially have happened if my circumstances are different, just horrifies me. And for me to sit here and not try to do the most that I possibly can, and particularly within our districts in every major city, San Diego, Los Angeles, you guys know San Francisco, Sacramento, every major city, and for us to turn an eye and not do something, I just couldn't do it. It would be a horrific mistake to sit in the legislature and not be able to do something towards that. And for that reason, I'm motivated, and for that reason, I'm interested. Now, having said that, I've asked my district director to take some rides with ABC because they do some of this type of work at night. Now, they can't necessarily prosecute, but what they can get them is on technicalities of serving alcohol after a certain time, et cetera, et cetera. And we've gone to 2 different locations in our district. I didn't go, but I'm going to go on a ride that we're scheduling. One was with folks who were stolen on their own will. And it looks like that because they don't speak the language. They're from different countries, et cetera. And my district director was telling us at 4 a.m, 20 or something young boys and girls, probably the ages of 12 and 13, were pulled out. And you know what? They can't speak. They don't want to speak. They're tormented, and they probably won't be good witnesses and probably can't be used for prosecution. They're scared out of their wits. And in another case, quite frankly, it's college students. And that's in my district, and anybody's welcome to come take a look at this, or who are undergoing the same or similar circumstances, very different nonetheless. And that's the reason I really got motivated, and that's the reason I really took up a bill. And granted, there's arguments about constitutional rights, but some laws are unjust and they're made to change. We're lawmakers. We change laws when we see the need to change laws. At one point in time, the law of this country allowed slavery. That got changed. And at this point in the country, we face an epic crisis on this that requires us to act and to change. And if that's not the avenue, that's fine. I'm okay with that not being the brightest idea. Maybe we'll think of a different idea that helps us to curb this. But that's really my motivation, is the fact that it happens and the fact that I now know and I have a conscience, and it's upon me to try to change something. And I know one of my colleagues who borders my district, I think we've had these conversations where they have similar circumstances, and I'll end it here. But Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you. We have run over the time for this. If someone has an urgent question, go ahead.
And hopefully this is a quick question or a question that you can follow up later. I'm a recovering bureaucrat. Worked in the city for 25 years. And I know the AG's office has task forces to deal with drugs, drug kingpins, and things of that nature. Because I'm a firm believer that there's got to be somebody in charge. And I think your task force that you put together for those type of incidents is because you need someone in charge to coordinate the county effort, the city effort, human resources, everything to pull together. Have you, at that part of your job of what you would like to do, what you'd like to create in the AG's office so that we can systematically pool all our resources to tackle it, or is that something that's really huge? Just remember, if you need money, I am in chair of budgets of 5, so don't worry about the money. Just worry about solving the problem. So if you can see from the passion of everyone on this committee, Assemblymember Santiago, this is really important. And if there's something you can't answer now, or to be able to get back to me, I would love to see a budget package or something, so that the reason for this is so that we can actually tackle the problem this year. That was the promise we made to several members of this committee.
And that's a topic that I'll definitely be following up with your office on. We have a number of task forces we've been hoping to find funding for through our Division of Law Enforcement that deal with these kind of complex organizations that regularly deal in guns, drugs, and human beings specifically. So we'll definitely be happy to follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. One thing I would just like to ask, and I don't want to ask I'm not going to ask you a question now because we have to get on to the next panel, but if you can get back to me at some time, we can go over the statistics, the numbers, and try and figure out why everybody who reports on this seems to give a different number for what the problem is. If we can get into sort of a micro level, of the 1,798, what is it they did, where are the victims coming from, et cetera, or a number of others you want to look at. If we can just look at this on the micro level, try and understand whether we're comparing apples and oranges, what exactly the crimes are. The other thing is you mentioned 1,798 folks as perpetrators, 1,277 as victims. Do you have any breakdown as to what is labor trafficking versus sex trafficking? That is a question. Can you answer?
No, but I'd be happy to look into that as well.
Okay, so let's, as people know, I'm a numbers guy, and I really would like to see that. I'm going to be back here in December, and perhaps we could speak then, or down in Hayward, Oakland area sometime. So let's follow up. Thank you very much, Mr. Sumner and Ms. Krell. All right. So the next discussion is panel 2 is discussion of the scope of laws related to human trafficking and prostitution and pimping. And I'm proud to say that I have Alameda County DA, my DA, Nancy O'Malley, that we have someone speaking for the erotic services providers, Maxine Dugan, and former Supervisor Deputy Attorney General Gerald Mosley, and then finally Stephen Munkelp from the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice. And what I'd like to do is if you could each perhaps speak for 5 minutes to give me an idea of where you're coming from and what you see as the issue. And we could go from there. Yeah, all right. All right, so would 5 minutes be okay for a start? And if you run a little bit over, that's okay too.